The plasma bolt struck the wall 3 inches from Corporal Eric Voss's head, and he didn't flinch. Princess Celia of the Virkon Empire watched from behind the crystalline barrier, her silver eyes widening as the human soldier pivoted, returned fire with mechanical precision, and dropped to cover without breaking rhythm. The attack on the diplomatic summit had erupted without warning. Masked infiltrators breaching the palace through maintenance shafts no one believed could be accessed. Now 15 minutes into the assault, bodies littered the grand hall, and the princess found herself trapped behind failing shields with only this single human guardian between her and execution. Eric's jaw tightened as his tactical display flickered. 3 hostiles, closing from the north corridor, 2 more flanking east. His rifle had 43 rounds remaining. The princess's 4 royal guards lay dead around them, their ornate armor no match for military-grade weapons. He was alone, outgunned, and responsible for the most valuable diplomatic asset in this sector of space. Queen Maliris, Celia's mother and sovereign of 12 billion souls, was somewhere in the palace's secure vault. If the princess died, the fragile human Virkon alliance would shatter before dawn. "They're coming from both sides," Celia whispered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the purple blood. Not hers, staining her ceremonial robes. She'd studied humans extensively, even insisted on one as her personal guard during these talks despite her mother's objections. Now she understood why the galactic community spoke of them with such conflicted fascination. Eric didn't respond verbally. He adjusted his grip, counted breaths, and when the first attacker rounded the eastern archway, he fired twice. Both shots found their mark through the narrow gap in the infiltrator's helmet. The body hadn't hit the floor before. Eric was already moving, throwing himself sideways as plasma fire scorched the air where he'd been. He landed hard, rolled, and came up firing. Another attacker down. The northern group burst through simultaneously. Eric's display showed the tactical impossibility. He couldn't cover both angles. 3 seconds to choose. He chose neither. Instead, he grabbed the fallen guard's ceremonial shield, activated its archaic energy field with a slap against the resonator, and hurled it toward the northern corridor while dropping prone. The shield's ungainly mass tumbled through the air, and the infiltrators' training betrayed them. They focused fire on the moving object, giving Eric the half-second he needed to eliminate 2 with precise headshots, before the third realized the deception. The final attacker was faster, smarter. Plasma fire punched through Eric's shoulder, spinning him. Pain exploded white-hot through his nervous system, but his rifle never wavered. He fired 3 times. The infiltrator's barrier held for 2 shots, failed on the third. The body collapsed. Silence fell like a physical weight. Eric lay still for 2 heartbeats, confirming no additional threats, then rose slowly to his feet. His left arm hung useless, blood spreading across his tactical vest. He moved to each fallen infiltrator, confirmed kills, stripped 3 for weapons and ammunition. The princess watched him work with clinical efficiency despite the wound that would have incapacitated any Virkon warrior. "You are injured," she said, stepping from behind the barrier now that the immediate threat had passed. "Yes, Your Highness." Eric's voice remained flat, professional. He loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle, one-handed, using his knee to seat it properly. That requires medical attention, after extraction. He scanned the corridors again, mind already calculating routes to the secure vault. The infiltrators' coordination suggested military training, possibly Kessari Dominion Special Forces. If they'd penetrated this deep, the entire palace could be compromised. Standard protocol demanded he secure the princess first, then coordinate with palace security, but his tactical display showed no friendly signatures within 300 meters. Either the security forces were dead, scattered, or the infiltrators had spoofed his systems. A child's scream echoed from somewhere above them, high-pitched, terrified, and very human. Eric froze. The sound came from the guest quarters, where Ambassador Chen's diplomatic staff resided. The ambassador's daughter, Maya, 8 years old with dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She'd shown Eric her collection of alien plants that morning, explaining each species with solemn precision. "We move to the vault," Celia said, reading his hesitation. "That's protocol." She was right. His duty was clear, absolute. 1 child versus the heir to an empire. The mathematics of war allowed no debate. The scream came again, closer now, followed by plasma fire and adult voices shouting in Kessari dialect. "Corporal Voss," the princess said, her tone hardening. "We must." He moved before she finished, sprinting toward the stairs with his rifle raised. Cyelia stood frozen for one shocked moment, then followed, her long legs carrying her faster than any human as she caught up to him on the landing. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "My job." Eric didn't slow, taking the steps 3 at a time despite the blood loss. His vision tunneled slightly, and he forced himself to breathe deeply, maintaining focus. The tactical situation had shifted from impossible to suicidal, but the calculation remained simple. He couldn't live with abandoning a child, even if it meant failing everything else. The guest quarters hallway was chaos. 2 Kesari infiltrators dragged a struggling Maya toward the external balcony where a stealth transport waited. Ambassador Chen lay motionless in the doorway, his status unclear. Eric didn't hesitate or announce himself. He fired while moving, a combat technique that sacrificed accuracy for speed. The first round went wide, the second caught the nearest Kesari in the leg, the third punched through his throat. The second infiltrator spun, using Maya as a shield, weapon pressed to her temple. "Drop it," the Kesari growled in accented standard, "or I paint these walls with her brain." His tactical computer calculated angles, trajectories, percentages. Every simulation ended in Maya's death if he took the shot. Behind him, he heard Celia's sharp intake of breath as she processed what was happening. "I said drop it, human." Eric's finger tightened on the trigger, and in that frozen instant, Princess Celia understood something profound about the species her empire had allied with. She understood why humans terrified half the galaxy and inspired the other half. She saw why her mother had privately confessed to finding them beautifully, dangerously unpredictable. The human soldier was going to take the shot anyway. He was going to attempt the impossible, because the alternative was surrender, and humans, she realized, were fundamentally incapable of accepting certain kinds of defeat. The mathematics of war allowed no debate, but humans had never been very good at mathematics when children screamed. Eric's breathing slowed, time dilating as his combat neurochemistry surged. The Kesari's weapon was a standard plasma pistol, compressed ionization chamber with 0.08 second charge cycle between trigger pull and discharge. Maya's head was 42 centimeters tall, roughly 21 centimeters wide. The Kesari held her offset to his left, using her as mobile cover while maintaining a firing solution on Eric. Textbook hostage protocol. But the Kesari had made one mistake. He'd assumed a human would calculate the same way every other species did. Eric fired. The round entered the Kesari's right eye, traveling at precisely the angle needed to avoid Maya's head by 3 centimeters. The infiltrator's weapon discharged reflexively as he died, but his death spasm pulled it off target. Plasma scorched the wall behind them. Maya dropped as the Kesari collapsed, her scream cutting off into shocked silence. Eric was already moving, scooping her up with his good arm while his wounded shoulder screamed in protest. He checked her visually, no injuries beyond bruises and terror, then set her down gently. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. His voice held the same tone he'd used that morning when she'd shown him her plants, calm and patient despite everything burning around them. She nodded mutely, small hands gripping the back of his tactical vest. Celia stood in the hallway entrance, her expression unreadable. "That was a 1 in 1,000 shot," she said softly. 1 in 347, Eric corrected, checking Ambassador Chen's pulse. "Alive, unconscious, probable concussion. I've made worse. If you'd missed." "I didn't," he rose, scanning for additional threats. His tactical display remained clear, but that meant nothing. The infiltrators had proven their ability to mask their signatures. "We need to move. They'll have heard the shots." "To the vault?" Eric looked at Maya, then at the princess, then at the growing pool of blood beneath his boots. His own blood, too much of it. Protocol said vault. Protocol said protect the asset of highest strategic value. Protocol was written by people who'd never looked into a child's terrified eyes and calculated her worth against empires. "The vault's compromised," he said, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke. It might not be true, but his instincts screamed warning. "We extract topside, signal for aerial evac." Celia's silver eyes narrowed. "You're guessing." "Yes, Your Highness." "And if you're wrong, you know how to use this?" She took it with both hands, checked the charge indicator with practiced ease. "I'm not just ornamental, Corporal. Can you run?" "Stay between the princess and me. If I say drop, you drop flat. Understand?" Another nod. They moved through the palace in single file. Eric leading, Maya in the middle, Celia guarding the rear. The architecture worked against them, all ceremonial grandeur and open sight lines designed to showcase power, not provide tactical cover. Eric's shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, his vision periodically swimming as blood loss accumulated. He'd lost perhaps a liter, maybe more. Most humans would be unconscious by now. He had perhaps 20 minutes of combat effectiveness remaining before shock claimed him. They encountered the first patrol at the junction of the residential wing and the ceremonial hall. 4 Kasari in full tactical gear, moving with military precision. Eric dropped behind a decorative pillar, gestured Celia and Maya down, and assessed. His rifle had 16 rounds. 4 targets with unknown shield capabilities. Poor odds. He pulled a flashbang from his vest. Standard issue for crowd control, not meant for lethal combat, but tools served those who understood them. He cooked it for 2 seconds, then threw it high, banking it off the ornate ceiling to land behind the patrol. The blast of light and sound disoriented the Kasari for perhaps 3 seconds. Eric used 2 of those seconds to cross 15 meters of open ground, using their own bodies as cover. He fired point-blank into the nearest infiltrator's unshielded back, then pivoted and used the falling body to shield himself from return fire. The other 3 were recovering, turning, bringing weapons to bear. Eric dropped low, fired twice into the second Kasari's knee joints, then rolled as plasma fire scorched where he'd been. Salia's plasma pistol discharged 3 times in rapid succession. The third Kasari stumbled, his barrier failing under the concentrated fire. Eric finished him with a single shot. The 4th had taken cover behind the pillar using the same tactical logic Eric had moments before. Stalemate. Except stalemates were won by whoever refused to accept them. Eric stood and walked forward, firing continuously. His rounds hammered the pillar, not trying to penetrate, just maintaining pressure. The Kasari returned fire, but Eric was already moving sideways, forcing an angle. The princess understood immediately and added her fire from the opposite direction. The Kasari couldn't shield both angles simultaneously. Eric's next round caught him in the shoulder. Celia's found his chest. The infiltrator dropped. "You fight like you've already accepted death," Celia said as they resumed movement, her voice carrying an odd note Eric couldn't quite identify. Not criticism, something closer to revelation. "All soldiers accept death, Your Highness. We just postpone it as long as possible." They climbed through the palace's upper levels, following maintenance routes Eric had memorized during the security briefing he'd attended 3 days prior. Most guards had ignored that briefing, bored by the technical details. Eric had committed every word to memory because that was what you did when lives depended on you. Maya remained silent, following instructions with the discipline of someone far older than 8. Her father had been right to be proud of her, Eric thought distantly. If they survived this, he'd tell the ambassador that. When they survived this... The rooftop access was sealed, heavy security door locked from the other side. Eric examined the control panel, found it dead. Someone had cut power to this section. Intentional choke point. "Can you breach it?" Celia asked. Eric studied the door's construction. Reinforced durasteel, meant to withstand direct assault. Breaching charges would work, but he'd used his last one 3 levels down. He could try shooting the lock mechanism, but these doors were designed against exactly that approach. "Step back," he said quietly, and when they'd complied, he examined the hinges instead. The door was secured by 6 heavy pins, each as thick as his thumb. Military grade certainly, but installed by craftsmen who'd prioritized ceremony over security. The pins were exposed, accessible, and while shooting them would take most of his remaining ammunition, it was possible. He fired carefully, precise shots that chipped away at each pin's housing. The rifle's recoil jarred his wounded shoulder with each round, pain spiking white and sharp, but his hands remained steady. 12 rounds later, the door sagged on failing supports. Eric kicked it once, hard. The door fell outward with a shriek of tortured metal. Darkness and open air greeted them. The palace roof was a maze of communication arrays and defensive emplacements, all currently silent. Eric's tactical display showed nothing, which meant either no threats existed or his systems were fully compromised. He trusted neither conclusion. "Stay low," he murmured, leading them between the arrays toward the emergency beacon station. Every palace had one, a hardened communication system designed to function even if primary systems failed. If he could reach it, broadcast their position, Allied forces would respond. The first shot came without warning, plasma fire that would have taken Eric's head if he hadn't been turning to check their rear. Instead, it burned across his already wounded shoulder, adding fresh agony to existing trauma. He dropped, returned fire blindly toward the source, and dragged Maya down with him. Celia fired 3 times, her shots more controlled than Eric's pain-driven response. "North array," she called. 2 contacts. Can you keep them suppressed? For how long? 90 seconds. Eric checked his rifle. 4 rounds remaining. He'd underestimated the door breach ammunition requirements. Fatal mistake, except he wasn't dead yet, so there remained time to correct it. He handed Maya his sidearm, a compact pistol he'd almost forgotten carrying. Point this at anything that's not us. Don't fire unless I say. Eric ran. The beacon station was 40 meters away across open roof. He covered the distance in 11 seconds, plasma fire tracking him the entire way. His tactical vest stopped 2 shots. A third burned through his leg, dropping him 3 meters from the objective. He crawled the remaining distance, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through multiple wounds. The beacon activated with his command code, broadcasting on all Allied frequencies. Then Eric turned and began the return journey, slower now, vision darkening at the edges. Queen Lyris emerged from the palace's central tower at precisely that moment, her personal guards surrounding her in perfect formation. She'd broken from the secure vault. Eric realized distantly, probably the moment the beacon activated. The Queen's presence changed everything. Additional targets, but also overwhelming firepower as her guards engaged the infiltrators with brutal efficiency. Eric made it halfway back to Celia and Maya before his legs stopped working. He sat down hard, rifle falling from nerveless fingers, and thought how strange it was that the stars were visible despite the city lights blazing around them. Beautiful, peaceful. Wrong, because he had a job unfinished. Small hands touched his face. Maya, crying, trying to keep him conscious with sheer determination. Princess Celia knelt beside him, her hands pressing against his shoulder wound, applying pressure with torn strips of her ceremonial robes. Behind her, the Queen approached with measured steps. "Corporal Voss," Celia said urgently. "Stay awake. Medical teams are coming." Eric tried to respond, managed only a slight nod. He'd done it, he thought. Kept him alive. The mathematics had worked after all, even the impossible ones. Queen Lyra stood above him, her expression unreadable as she studied the human soldier who'd abandoned protocol to save a child, who'd fought through impossible odds, who'd performed miracles through sheer refusal to accept defeat. "Witnessed," she said softly. The word carrying weight in Virkon culture Eric was too far gone to understand. He closed his eyes as medical personnel swarmed around him, consciousness finally slipping away. Eric woke to white light and the smell of antiseptic. His first conscious thought was tactical assessment. Location, threats, asset status. Hospital, based on the medical equipment surrounding him. No immediate threats, based on the lack of alarm or urgency in the quiet conversations he heard nearby. "Assets, you're awake," Princess Celia's voice, closer than expected. She sat in a chair beside his bed, her ceremonial robes replaced by simple civilian dress. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, suggesting inadequate sleep. "Maya?" Eric's voice came out rough, throat dry from intubation. "Alive and safe. Ambassador Chen recovered consciousness 3 hours after the attack. He's demanded to see you 6 times. I've told him you were unavailable." Eric processed this, memory slowly reconstructing the events that had led him here. The Queen? Safe? 43 infiltrators were killed or captured. The Kessari Dominion has denied all knowledge as expected. The diplomatic summit has been postponed pending investigation. Saelia leaned forward slightly. "You've been unconscious for 37 hours. The medical team said you'd lost enough blood to kill most humans. Your shoulder required complete reconstruction. The burn on your leg damaged muscle tissue that may never fully regenerate. You'll likely face chronic pain and reduced mobility." She delivered these facts with clinical precision, but Eric heard something underneath the words, an emotion the princess was working to contain. "The mission parameters were satisfied," he said. "You're alive. My mother wishes to speak with you. She's been waiting." Before Eric could respond, the door opened and Queen Lyris entered, her presence immediately dominating the space despite her relatively small stature. She dismissed her guards with a gesture, leaving only Celia and Eric in the room. The Queen studied him with eyes that had governed billions, made decisions that shaped worlds, and Eric met her gaze without flinching because fear and respect were different things. "Corporal Voss," she said finally, "my daughter tells me you abandoned your primary objective to rescue a child." "Yes, Your Majesty." "She also tells me you fired a shot with 1 in 300 odds while wounded and under extreme duress. The shot was necessary." "If the child had died and my daughter along with her?" Eric considered the question carefully. "Then I would have failed, Your Majesty." "But I couldn't have lived with not trying." The Queen's expression shifted slightly, something almost like approval crossing her features. You understand this was catastrophically poor judgment from a tactical perspective. Yes. Yes. And yet you'd do it again. It wasn't a question, but Eric answered anyway. Yes, Your Majesty. Silence filled the room. Celia watched her mother intently, reading subtle shifts in posture and expression that Eric couldn't interpret. Finally, the Queen nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already known. Humanity is strange to us, she said quietly. You calculate differently than any species we've encountered. When presented with impossible choices, you somehow make them possible through sheer refusal to accept reality's constraints. It makes you dangerous, unpredictable, difficult allies. She moved closer, standing directly beside his bed now. It also makes you invaluable, because sometimes reality's constraints must be refused. Sometimes the impossible must be attempted anyway. And in those moments, I am beginning to understand humans are exactly the allies we need. The Queen glanced at her daughter, then back to Eric. You saved Celia's life. You saved a human child's life. You held a position that should have fallen within minutes and held it long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The mathematics say you should have died 3 different times during that engagement. Luck, Your Majesty. No. The Queen's voice hardened. Not luck. Something else. Something that terrifies our enemies and inspires our allies. I witnessed it myself when I emerged to find you crawling across that roof, too wounded to walk but still moving towards your objective. I witnessed the impossible, Corporal Voss. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried formal weight. By the authority vested in me as sovereign of the Virkon Empire, I hereby award you the Star of Caliph, our highest military honor. You are the first human to receive this recognition. You will also receive full medical support for the duration of your recovery, a diplomatic commission as liaison between our peoples, and my personal gratitude, which is not lightly given. Your Majesty, I was just doing my job. You were doing far more than your job, Celia interjected softly. You were proving something we needed to see. That humanity's reputation, the legends we've heard, the impossible feats attributed to your species, they're not exaggerations. They're just what you are. The Queen nodded agreement. For 3 generations, my family has debated whether alliance with humanity was wise. We've studied your wars, your history, your capacity for violence, and your capacity for compassion. We've tried to calculate whether you'd be reliable partners or dangerous variables. And every calculation has proven insufficient because you don't follow predictable patterns. She smiled, a rare expression that transformed her face. But I understand now. You're reliable precisely because you're unpredictable. When everything fails and darkness closes in, humans will do something impossible. Not because they calculated success probability, but because the alternative is surrender, and surrender isn't in your nature. Eric felt exhaustion pulling at him again, the conversation draining his limited reserves, but he forced himself to remain focused. What happens now, Your Majesty? Now you recover. Then we formalize this alliance properly, with full understanding of what it means to stand beside humanity. The Kessari Dominion wanted to demonstrate our alliance was weak, that attacking a summit would shatter cooperation. Instead, they've proven exactly why we need each other. The Queen turned toward the door, then paused. One final thing, Corporal. The shot you fired to save the child, my tactical analysts studied it. They say it was impossible, that the angle was too precise, the target too small, the conditions too chaotic. They say no one could make that shot. She looked back at him. Would you like to know what I told them? Yes, Your Majesty. I told them they were right. No one could make that shot. But a human could, because humans have never understood the difference between no one and someone willing to try anyway. The Queen departed, leaving Celia alone with Eric. The princess sat quietly for a moment, then reached out and took his hand, a gesture of intimacy that violated several protocols but which neither commented upon. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For teaching me something about courage, about what it means to protect people not because duty demands it, but because abandoning them would make survival meaningless. She squeezed his hand gently. The Virkon have many warriors, Corporal Voss. We have soldiers who would die for honor, for duty, for empire. But I don't know if we have anyone who would do what you did, risk everything for a child that wasn't even your own species. Eric thought about Maya's small hands gripping his vest, her trust absolute despite the chaos around them. She was a child. That's all the species that mattered. Celia smiled, and Eric realized he'd never seen her smile before, not during the diplomatic functions or security briefings or formal dinners. Yes, she said softly. That's very human of you. Medical staff returned then, gently but firmly insisting the princess allow their patient to rest. Celia departed with obvious reluctance, and Eric found himself alone with his thoughts and the quiet beeping of monitoring equipment. He'd survived, against probability, against tactical reality, against every reasonable calculation. He'd survived and succeeded. The princess lived. Maya lived. Ambassador Chen would recover. The alliance held. All objectives achieved through a combination of training, luck, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept failure. Eric closed his eyes, letting exhaustion claim him again. Somewhere in the hospital, Maya was probably being kept under observation, likely bored and restless, probably driving the staff to distraction with questions. Somewhere else, diplomatic teams were analyzing what had happened, calculating next steps, determining how this attack would reshape galactic politics. But none of that was his concern right now. Right now, his job was to heal. And when he healed, there would be new jobs, new challenges, new impossible situations that someone would need to resolve. He smiled slightly, consciousness fading. Let them come. Humans specialized in the impossible. It was what they did. 3 weeks later, Eric stood on the observation deck of the Virkon Palace, his shoulder still stiff despite advanced medical treatment, his leg aching dully from the reconstructed muscle tissue. He'd been released from medical care 5 days prior but remained at the palace at the Queen's request. The diplomatic commission she'd mentioned wasn't ceremonial. He'd already attended 7 high-level meetings, providing human perspective on tactical decisions and security protocols. Maya approached from behind, her footsteps deliberately loud so as not to startle him. Eric had noticed she did that now, announced her presence carefully, a small trauma response to everything she'd witnessed. Ambassador Chen says we're going home tomorrow, she announced, standing beside him at the railing. The city sprawled below them, alien architecture glittering in the setting sun. That's good, Eric said. You miss Earth? I miss my room, and my dog. She was quiet for a moment. But I'll miss you too. She'd drawn him a picture yesterday, crude but earnest, showing a stick-figure soldier protecting a smaller stick-figure girl from angular threats. He'd kept it, tucked it into his personal effects, with a handful of other things he'd collected over his years of service. I'll still be around, he said, just in a different capacity. Liaison work means lots of travel between human and Virkon space. Will you come visit? If I can. She seemed satisfied with this, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Eric had learned during his recovery that Maya processed trauma differently than adults. She didn't need extensive conversation or therapy sessions as much as she needed small moments of normalcy, brief confirmations that the world continued despite what had happened. Corporal Voss? Ambassador Chen's voice came from the entrance. The ambassador looked fully recovered now, the medical team having erased all evidence of his injuries. The princess requests your presence in the strategy room? Eric nodded, ruffled Maya's hair gently, and followed the ambassador through the palace corridors. They walked in silence until they'd passed out of Maya's earshot. Then Chen spoke quietly. I've been composing my report to command for 2 weeks now. I still don't know how to explain what you did. It's in my after-action report, sir. Twice. It's very thorough and completely fails to capture the fact that you abandoned your primary objective to save my daughter. Chen stopped walking, turned to face Eric directly. By all standard protocols, that was a court-martial offense. You prioritized a civilian child over the heir to an empire. Eric met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir. Then you'd do it again. Yes, sir. Chen studied him for a long moment. I'm not going to include that detail in my report. As far as command will know, you made a tactical decision to extract all protected assets via the most secure route available. The princess, my daughter, and yourself. One package, one objective. That's not what happened, sir. Because the alternative is watching humanity's finest soldier face disciplinary action for doing the right thing, and I don't have the stomach for that kind of bureaucratic horseshit. Chen's expression softened slightly. You saved Maya's life, Eric. You could have left her. Probably should have left her, by the book. But you didn't, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life grateful for that moment of insubordination. Before Eric could respond, the ambassador continued walking, and Eric followed, thoughts churning. He hadn't regretted his choice during the crisis, hadn't questioned it afterward, but hearing it framed as insubordination made him consider the broader implications. What if the princess had died? What if his gamble had failed and the alliance collapsed? How many lives would that have cost? The strategy room held Princess Celia, Queen Lyris, and 3 Vircon military advisors Eric recognized from previous meetings. They all turned as he entered, and the Queen gestured for him to join them at the tactical display. Corporal Voss, thank you for joining us. We've been analyzing the attack patterns from the summit assault, and we've discovered something disturbing. The display activated, showing the palace layout overlaid with infiltration routes. The Kasari had inside intelligence, extremely detailed intelligence about our security protocols, response times, and defensive positions. One of the advisors, a scarred veteran named Krell, pointed to several key locations. They knew exactly where the security gaps were, precisely when guard rotations occurred, and had accurate information about the vault's location. This suggests betrayal, Eric finished. Someone on the inside provided intelligence. We've been conducting investigations, but so far nothing conclusive. Which brings us to why we've asked you here. The Queen looked at him directly. You're an outsider to our internal politics. You have no stake in court intrigues or factional disputes, and you've proven yourself trustworthy under the most extreme circumstances. I would like you to lead this investigation. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not an investigator. I'm a soldier. You're a problem solver, Celia corrected. You see patterns others miss, make connections that seem obvious only in retrospect. My mother and I have watched you work, Corporal. You think differently than we do, and that's exactly what we need. With respect, Your Majesty, assigning a human to investigate potential Vircon traitors could be seen as provocative. It might suggest we don't trust our own people. That's the point. Someone we trusted betrayed us, Krell. Someone with access to our most sensitive information sold that information to our enemies. I need someone who exists outside that trust network to find them. She turned back to Eric. I'm not ordering you to accept this. Your commission allows you to refuse assignments you deem inappropriate, but I am asking, personally, for your help. Eric considered the request. Investigation work meant weeks, possibly months of detailed analysis, interviews, pattern recognition. It meant delaying his return to regular duty, remaining embedded in Vircon culture far longer than initially planned. It meant making enemies among those who saw him as an outsider interfering in internal affairs. It also meant potentially saving lives by preventing future attacks, strengthening the alliance by demonstrating human commitment to Vircon security, and catching whoever had enabled the deaths of good soldiers. I'll need full access to security records, personnel files, and communication logs, he said. I'll need authorization to question anyone, regardless of rank or position. And I'll need someone who understands Vircon culture to work with me, help me navigate social dynamics I don't fully understand. Granted, the Queen said immediately. Celia will serve as your liaison and cultural advisor. The princess nodded acceptance, though Eric caught a flash of surprise. She hadn't known about this assignment beforehand. Then I accept, Your Majesty. The briefing continued for another hour, with advisors providing initial intelligence reports and security analyses. Eric absorbed it all, already beginning to form preliminary theories. The infiltrators had known too much, not just about physical security, but about timing and personnel. That suggested someone with regular access to operational planning, someone present at high-level meetings. When the briefing finally concluded and the advisors departed, Eric found himself alone with the princess in the empty strategy room. You didn't have to accept, Celia said quietly. This assignment will make you few friends among my people. Making friends isn't part of my job description, Your Highness. No, but making enemies can be dangerous, especially when those enemies might include traitors willing to kill. She moved closer, her expression serious. I want you to understand what you've agreed to. Whoever provided intelligence to the Kesari is powerful, connected, and ruthless. When you start digging into court politics and military hierarchies, you'll threaten powerful people. They will push back. Eric met her gaze steadily. I've been shot, blown up, and left for dead more times than I can count, Your Highness. Court politics might be dangerous, but at least no one's trying to kill me with plasma fire. Don't be too certain about that. But she smiled slightly. Still, I'm glad you accepted. Selfishly, it means you'll be staying longer. I've enjoyed our conversations. Eric realized, somewhat to his surprise, that he'd enjoyed them too. The princess had proven herself far more than ornamental. Sharp, insightful, with a dry wit that surfaced occasionally in private conversations. Working with her on this investigation would be interesting, at minimum. When do we start? He asked. Tomorrow. I'll arrange access to the security archives and begin compiling a list of personnel with appropriate clearance levels. She paused. Eric, May I call you Eric? Yes, Your Highness. Celia. We're going to be working closely for weeks. Let's dispense with excessive formality. She looked out the window at the darkening city. Thank you for accepting this. For everything you've already done. I'm just doing my job, Your High Celia. You're doing far more than your job. Again. She glanced at him. That seems to be a human specialty. Eric thought about Maya's drawing tucked in his quarters, about the impossible shot he'd fired, about every decision that had led him to this moment. Maybe we just define the job differently. Perhaps. Or perhaps humans understand something the rest of us are still learning. That the job isn't what's written in the orders. It's what needs doing, regardless of what the orders say. That was exactly how humans operated. They received orders, followed protocols, maintained discipline. But when reality demanded something different, when the written procedures proved inadequate, humans improvised. They adapted. They did what needed doing, consequences be damned. Made them unpredictable, difficult. Sometimes insubordinate. It also made them exactly the allies the Vircon needed, whether the Vircon fully understood that yet or not. I should go, Eric said. Early start tomorrow. Celia nodded, but didn't move immediately. Eric? That shot you made, the one that saved Maya, the analysts are still arguing about whether it was skill or luck. What do you think? I think it was necessity. I think you made it because the alternative was unacceptable, and humans are very good at refusing to accept unacceptable alternatives. She smiled. I think you made it possible by refusing to acknowledge it was impossible. That's a dangerous way to live. Yes, but also a powerful one. She finally turned toward the door. Good night, Eric. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we hunt traitors. Good night, Celia. He remained in the strategy room after she departed, studying the tactical displays with the initial formation of ideas beginning to crystallize. Someone had betrayed the Vircon. Someone had enabled deaths, threatened the Alliance, and nearly cost him his life and the lives of people he'd sworn to protect. Finding them wouldn't be easy. It would require patience, careful analysis, and the kind of relentless attention to detail that separated adequate soldiers from exceptional ones. But Eric had time now. He had authorization. He had a partner who understood the terrain he'd be navigating. Most importantly, he had motivation. Personal motivation, because whoever had planned that attack had put Maya in danger, had created the situation that still gave her nightmares. Eric pulled up the first set of security records and began reading, his methodical mind already sorting patterns and anomalies. Somewhere in these files was a clue, a connection, a mistake the traitor had made, and Eric would find it. Because that was what humans did. They pursued objectives relentlessly, refused to quit, made the impossible possible through sheer determination. The traitor had witnessed the impossible when Eric survived that assault. Soon they'd witness something else impossible. A human soldier who never gave up, never stopped hunting, never accepted that some mysteries couldn't be solved. Eric smiled slightly as he worked, shoulder aching, leg throbbing, mind fully engaged. The hunt had begun, and humans were very, very good at hunting. The impossible was about to become inevitable,